The Portland Trailblazers are a team that I have mixed feelings on. I'll start with the good about this team. They do have a lot of young talent. I think Anthony Simons is the most underrated young player in the league. He reminds me a lot of a young Damian Lillard, and at his age, he still has a lot of room to grow and develop and just keep leveling up his game. Then you have Scoot Henderson, who had a bit of a disappointing rookie year, but he's someone who finished the year strong, and I still think he has a lot of upside and potential. You have Donovan Clingan, who you took 7th overall this year. He's someone who can be really good defensively, has a lot of potential as a rim protector, which is something Portland really struggled with last year. Then there's still Shaedon Sharpe, a guy who in his sophomore season missed a lot of time, but over the first 2 years of his career, he's shown a lot of athleticism, lots of scoring potential, someone who Portland will definitely want to invest in over the next few years. Portland also acquired Deni Avdija this summer, and he's one of the best all-around young wings in the league today. He can be a really good starter and a good winning player on a team, and that's something that any rebuilding organization should want to look for. There's also guys like Toumani Camara, Jabari Walker, Delano Banton, players who don't necessarily have as much potential as the guys I just talked about, but who could still be good NBA rotation players going forward. While I don't think that this Portland team is going to be very good this season, I think that they'll be a lot more fun to watch this year than they were last year. This is a team that ranked 21st in pace last season and 23rd in fast break points. Scoot Henderson was someone who was drafted into the league, viewed as someone who was really explosive, someone who could push the ball in transition, but he had an adjustment period that he had to go through as a rookie, and I think he will be better as a sophomore. Then you had guys like Anthony Simons, only played 46 games last year. Shaedon Sharpe only played 32 games last year. These are young guys who can run and get out in transition, but just weren't consistently in the lineup, or in Scoot Henderson's case, was adjusting to the NBA game. I think if Scoot Henderson has a second-year jump, Simons and Sharpe are more healthy, and you combine that with the addition of a guy like Deni Avdija, who I mentioned can rebound and push the ball in transition, it'll just make Portland a much more fast team, a much more fun team to watch, and a team that will just get a lot of easy transition points. I also went back and looked at some of Portland's lineup data from last season. I found that when the Blazers played Scoot, Simons, Ayton, and 2 respectable wings all together, the Blazers actually boasted some pretty solid lineups, and looking at their potential starting lineup this year, if they have a lineup of Scoot, Simons, Deni Avdija, Jerami Grant, and DeAndre Ayton, that's a lineup that features 5 good NBA players, assuming Scoot Henderson takes a bit of a jump next year. While guys like Jerami Grant and DeAndre Ayton likely aren't long-term pieces of Portland's future, they can at least be placeholders for now and show the front office that if we have a lineup of Scoot, Simons, Deni Avdija, as long as we surround those two with 2 solid NBA players in a lineup, that can actually be effective and be a lineup that works. I'm also interested to see a lineup of Scoot Henderson, Anthony Simons, Shaedon Sharpe, Deni Avdija, and Donovan Clingan. These are Portland's 5 best young players, and I'm excited to see how they gel together, which combinations work and which don't, how these guys build chemistry over the year. Portland's in the early stages of a rebuild. They're not trying to compete for the play-in or the playoffs. So when that's the case, you just have to see how your young guys fit together, and you just have to experiment with different lineups, different combinations. So I'm really excited to see those lineups throughout the year. Something else that excites me about Portland is that they have the ability to acquire more assets. They did give up some picks for Deni Avdija, but they still have picks from the Damian Lillard trade. And as I mentioned, guys like Jerami Grant and DeAndre Ayton are guys that they could potentially trade in the future. Then on top of that, Portland is in a loaded Western Conference. There's just so many good teams in the West, so they'll probably be towards the bottom of the standings, which just means that they'll have a better chance at a top pick in the 2025 draft, which really looks like a good class. So yeah, while there are things to be excited about with this Portland team, I do have a little bit of uncertainty about their future. After the draft, Joe Cronin had an interview and he talked about how excited he was to have drafted Donovan Clingan, and he also talked about building around Scoot and Shaedon Sharpe, but he left Anthony Simons out of the conversation completely. I know that Simons is a few years older than Scoot and Shaedon Sharpe and Donovan Clingan, but he's still very young at 25 years old, and it feels like he's just become the odd man out, and that a trade for him is almost inevitable at this point. And sure, maybe trading Anthony Simons, bringing back some assets for him, and then building around the other young guys will be the way to go, but Anthony Simons is the best young player on this team right now, and I don't think it's crazy to say that he's going to end up having the best career out of the young guys on this team. A few years ago when Damian Lillard was injured and Anthony Simons was really stepping up in a larger role, I was clamoring for the Blazers to trade Lillard back then. If we go back and look at Damian Lillard's early career, Portland was never able to build a contending team because they were never bad enough to bring in lots of young talent. When Lillard was first drafted to Portland, he was kind of the missing piece for that team because they already had Wesley Matthews, they had Nick Batum, they had LaMarcus Aldridge, they brought in Robin Lopez, so they really needed a point guard. And because he found success early on, he was able to get Portland to the playoffs in his second and third year. But after that third season, Wesley Matthews left in free agency, Nick Batum was traded to the Hornets, LaMarcus Aldridge left, Robin Lopez left. So everyone was expecting the Blazers to be really bad that following season, but then CJ McCollum stepped up and they formed a really dynamic backcourt and they continued to make the playoffs. So they're one of those teams that was good enough to make the playoffs, never really good enough to contend for a championship, but because they never went through a period where they were really bad after Aldridge and those other guys left, they were never able to acquire young star talent to surround Dame with. And when I look at Anthony Simons, he reminds me a lot of a young Damian Lillard. And had the Blazers traded Lillard earlier and just committed to a rebuild earlier, I think that they could have justified building a team around Anthony Simons, whereas now they waited a few years, now he's in his mid-20s as opposed to his early 20s. It feels like he's the odd man out and someone who's inevitably going to be traded. Now, I do want to emphasize that this is still a very exciting team, even with Anthony Simons potentially being out of the picture. I thought Denny Avdia and Donovan Clingan were two great additions. I don't see these guys as future star players, but I think that they're the winning type of players that every playoff hopeful team or competing hopeful team would want and need. Then you have Scoot Henderson, who didn't live up to the hype as a rookie, but he did finish the year very strong. And you have Shaedon Sharpe, who was injured for most of his second year, but like Scoot Henderson, he finished his rookie year very strong, and he gave Portland fans something to be very excited about. On top of that, Portland should have one of the worst records in the league this year, which would give them a chance at a #1 pick, getting someone like Cooper Flagg and just adding to their young core. So yeah, the potential of this team is extremely high, but there are still questions that need to be answered about this team in the coming years. Can Scoot Henderson and Shaedon Sharpe play next to each other? Is there anyone on this roster that Portland feels that they can build around, and if not, how do they get that guy? Is it through the draft? Are they just hoping they get lucky and get a #1 overall pick? Would it be done by trading Anthony Simons and maybe some other assets? These are the questions I have about this team going forward, but I'm still excited to see them play this year, see how the young guys develop, see how their chemistry is together, and hopefully we'll get a clear idea of how this front office is going to shape this roster going forward. With all that being said, I have Portland finishing 14th in the West this year. As I said earlier, the West is just a very deep conference, and Portland is still a young, rebuilding team. They may make some trades midway through the season, trade some of their veterans, so I'm not expecting them to be great record-wise, but this should still be a very fun team to watch, and I'm excited to see how the young talent develops. Anyways, that's going to be all for today's video. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. With all that being said, I'm out, and I'll see you in the next video.